Between 1882 and 1896, the Smithsonian Institution excavated over 3,000 burial mounds across Ohio. They dug up thousands of artifacts, skeletal remains, advanced metalwork, intricate carvings, evidence of a civilization that shouldn't have existed. And then they published less than 2% of what they found. The rest, locked away, categorized, hidden in basement storage facilities where the public would never see them. Why? What did they find in those mounds that was so threatening it had to be buried a second time? The official story is simple. The mounds were built by primitive Native American tribes, simple earthworks, burial sites, nothing more. But the artifacts tell a different story, a story of advanced metallurgy, astronomical knowledge, architectural sophistication that rivals ancient Rome, and skeletal remains that don't fit the narrative. Remains of people who were, according to multiple excavation reports, unusually tall. 7 feet, 8 feet, some reports claim even larger. Giants. But you won't find those reports in modern textbooks. You won't find them in the Smithsonian archives, because they were disappeared, suppressed, erased from the historical record, and the question is why. Let's start with what we know for certain. In the 1800s, the state of Ohio was covered with earthen mounds, thousands of them. Some were small, just a few feet high. Others were massive structures, over 60 feet tall, containing multiple burial chambers. The largest mound complexes covered hundreds of acres. They were geometric, perfectly aligned. Some formed circles, others formed octagons. Some were shaped like animals, serpents, bears, birds. These weren't random piles of dirt, they were engineered, planned. Built with knowledge of geometry and astronomy that shouldn't have existed in North America 2,000 years ago. The local settlers knew about the mounds. They'd been digging into them since the 1700s, looking for treasure. And they found things: copper breastplates, mica sheets cut into geometric shapes, stone tablets with unknown writing, pipes carved with incredible detail. But there was no systematic study, no official record, just grave robbers and curiosity seekers hauling artifacts away, until the Smithsonian got involved. In 1882, the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology launched the Division of Mound Exploration. They hired Cyrus Thomas to lead it. Thomas was a respected archaeologist, a scientist, someone who would bring academic rigor to the study of these mysterious structures. The mission was clear: document every mound, excavate systematically, catalogue every artifact, answer the question once and for all. Who built these mounds? The project lasted 14 years. They opened over 3,000 mounds across the Midwest, with the majority in Ohio. They employed hundreds of workers. They took thousands of photographs. They filled warehouses with artifacts. And in 1894, Cyrus Thomas published his final report. It was 1,200 pages long. It documented the excavation of a fraction of the mounds they'd opened. And it came to a very specific conclusion. The mounds were built by the ancestors of modern Native American tribes. There was nothing mysterious about them. No lost civilization, no advanced technology, just primitive earthworks built by primitive people. Case closed. But here's where it gets interesting. Thomas's report only covered a tiny percentage of what they actually found. Hundreds of excavation reports were never published. Thousands of artifacts were never photographed for the public record. And the skeletal remains, the ones that didn't fit the narrative, disappeared entirely. In the years following the publication of Thomas's report, researchers started asking questions. They wanted to see the unpublished data. They wanted access to the artifacts. The Smithsonian's response was always the same. The materials are archived. They're being catalogued. They're not available for public viewing. Decades passed. The researchers died, and the materials remained locked away. By the mid-20th century, most people had forgotten the mounds even existed. Those that remained were ploughed over, built on, destroyed by development. The evidence was erased, both physically and from the historical record. But some of the original excavation reports survived. Not the ones published by the Smithsonian, the ones written by local newspapers, by private collectors, by amateur archaeologists who were there when the mounds were opened. And those reports tell a very different story than the official narrative. They describe artifacts that suggest a level of technological sophistication that shouldn't have been possible. They describe skeletal remains that challenge everything we think we know about who lived in North America before European contact. And they describe a cover-up. Let's talk about the artifacts. In mound after mound, excavators found copper tools and ornaments, not crude copper, refined copper. Copper that had been smelted, alloyed and worked with a level of skill that rivals modern metallurgy. Some of the copper breastplates found in Ohio mounds weighed over 20 pounds. They were hammered into shape with precision, decorated with intricate designs. The copper itself came from the Great Lakes region, over 500 miles away. That means the mound builders had trade networks spanning half a continent. They had the ability to transport tons of raw copper across hundreds of miles of wilderness. And they had the knowledge to work that copper into finished goods. Then there's the mica. Mica is a mineral that splits into thin, transparent sheets. It's fragile, difficult to work with. And yet, Ohio mounds contained huge sheets of mica cut into perfect geometric shapes, circles, squares, crescents. Some of these mica sheets were over 4 feet across. They were cut so precisely that the edges were straight and smooth. No crude stone tools did that. And the mica itself didn't come from Ohio. It came from the Appalachian Mountains, 300 miles to the east. Again, long-distance trade. Again, sophisticated knowledge. The stone tablets are even more interesting. Some of the mounds contained engraved stones with symbols that don't match any known Native American writing system. They're not pictographs. They're not simple drawings. They're organized, structured. Some researchers have compared them to ancient European scripts, to Nordic runes, to symbols found in the Mediterranean. The Smithsonian's official position is that these tablets are either fakes or misinterpreted natural markings. But the tablets were found in sealed burial chambers surrounded by artifacts that are unquestionably authentic. If they're fakes, who made them? And why bury them deep inside a mound with real artifacts? And then there are the skeletons. This is where the story gets truly strange. Multiple newspaper accounts from the 1800s describe the discovery of unusually large skeletal remains in the Ohio mounds. The Wheeling Daily Intelligencer reported in 1870 that a mound contained a skeleton measuring 7 feet 6 inches. The New York Times reported in 1894 that a mound in Ohio contained skeletons reaching heights of 8 feet. Local papers across Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin published similar stories throughout the late 1800s. Now, the skeptics will tell you, these reports are exaggerations, and sure, some probably were. But when you have dozens of reports from different states, different decades, all describing the same thing, it's harder to dismiss. The Smithsonian's own field reports mention unusually large skeletal remains, but those mentions never made it into the published record. So what happened to those skeletons? The official answer is that they were either lost, destroyed, or misidentified. The Smithsonian claims that any skeletal remains that seemed unusually large were probably just normal-sized skeletons that were mismeasured or misunderstood. But researchers who've requested access to the skeletal collections have been denied. The remains are too fragile, the Smithsonian says. They're stored in conditions that don't allow for public access. They're being studied by approved researchers only. But which researchers, and what are they finding? We don't know, because the Smithsonian doesn't publish that information. This is where the Tartaria connection comes in. Tartaria refers to a theory that there was a vast advanced civilization that existed across much of the northern hemisphere until relatively recently. This civilization was technologically sophisticated and deliberately erased from history. Mainstream historians dismiss Tartaria as pseudo-history, but the people who study the Ohio mounds see parallels. They see evidence of an advanced civilization that built massive earthworks, worked with metals, and then vanished. A civilization that doesn't fit the accepted narrative. Consider the timeline. The mounds are dated to between 2,000 and 1,000 years ago, but that dating is based on artifacts found near the mounds, not the mounds themselves. It's possible the mounds are much older, or much newer. And if they're newer, if they were built within the last few hundred years, then the question becomes, who built them? Some researchers point to similarities between the Ohio earthworks and structures found in Europe and Asia. the geometric precision, the astronomical alignments. There are mounds in Ohio that align with the solstices, that form perfect circles using the same mathematical principles found in ancient Greek architecture. These aren't primitive structures, they're sophisticated. And then there's the question of what happened to the mound builders. The official story is that they were absorbed into later Native American cultures, but that doesn't explain why there's no continuity. Modern Native American tribes in Ohio don't claim descent from the mound builders. Many tribes told early European settlers that the mounds were already there when they arrived, that they were built by a race of giants who lived before them. Now, here's where we need to be careful. There's a long history of using the lost civilization narrative to diminish Native American achievements. That's racist nonsense. Native Americans were and are fully capable of building sophisticated structures. The question isn't whether they could have, the question is, did they? And if so, why is there such a disconnect between the mound building cultures and the tribes that came after? The Smithsonian's answer is assimilation, but what if the mound builders were a separate population? A population that was removed from the historical record? And what if the Smithsonian found evidence of that and decided it was too problematic to publish? Let's go back to the numbers. 3,000 mounds excavated, thousands of artifacts recovered, and less than 2% published. Where's the rest? The Smithsonian says it's archived, but researchers have filed Freedom of Information Act requests to access the unpublished mound data. Those requests have been denied. The materials are deteriorating, the Smithsonian claims, but digital scans could be made, photographs could be released, yet they aren't. In 2005, a researcher named Richard Dewhurst published a book compiling hundreds of newspaper accounts of giant skeletons found in mounds. He filed requests with the Smithsonian to access their skeletal collections, specifically looking for remains over 7 feet tall. His requests were denied. The Smithsonian's response was that they don't have any skeletal remains matching that description. But that contradicts their own field reports from the 1800s. So either the Smithsonian is lying about what they have, or they destroyed the evidence. Either way, it's a cover-up. And the question is, why? One theory is that it challenges the Bering Strait migration model. The accepted scientific consensus is that humans first arrived in the Americas by crossing a land bridge from Asia around 15,000 years ago. But if the Ohio mounds were built by a different population with European origins, then that model falls apart completely. Another theory is that it challenges ideas about technological progress. We're taught that civilization develops linearly, but the Ohio mounds suggest something different. They suggest advanced civilizations existed 2,000 years ago, and then that knowledge was lost. And that's uncomfortable because it means progress isn't inevitable. But there's a darker theory, a theory that ties into the Tartaria narrative. What if the mound builders weren't just an advanced Native American culture? What if they were part of a global civilization that existed until relatively recently? A civilization that was systematically destroyed. The Tartaria researchers point to mud flood evidence, to reset events. They argue that there was a world-spanning culture that was wiped out in the 1800s, and the Ohio mounds, with their geometric precision and astronomical alignments, fit that pattern. Now, I'm not saying I believe that, but I am saying that the evidence is strange, the Smithsonian's behavior is strange, the fact that 98% of the data from the largest archaeological project in American history was never published is strange. And when institutions act strangely, when they hide information and deny access and contradict their own records, people start asking questions, reasonable questions about transparency and scientific integrity. What did the Smithsonian find in those Ohio mounds that was so threatening? Where are the artifacts now? Where are the skeletal remains? And why won't they let independent researchers verify their claims? These aren't conspiracy theories. These are legitimate questions about transparency and scientific integrity. The Smithsonian is a public institution funded by American taxpayers. The data they collected belongs to the public, and yet the public is denied access to the very information that could answer these questions. So here's what we're left with. 3,000 mounds excavated across Ohio and the surrounding Midwest. Thousands upon thousands of artifacts recovered. Evidence of a sophisticated civilization that built geometric earthworks, worked with metals, and traded across half a continent. Evidence that doesn't fit the accepted narrative of primitive Native American tribes slowly developing over thousands of years. And an institution that excavated all of this evidence, catalogued every single piece, and then locked it away where no one can see it. Less than 2% published, 98% hidden. And no good explanation for it all.